Good morning. It is still, we've got 2 minutes of morning left. I'm so happy to welcome you all to the second day of Atlanta Art Ecosystems. I'm going to, for those of you who were here yesterday, you're going to hear again, essentially, the same welcome comments. But I want to make sure that everyone here is familiar with what it is that you're experiencing. And first of all, I want to thank Atlanta Contemporary for hosting us, to their staff. They've been really wonderful and accommodating. And to thank you for being a part of the ecosystems that we're discussing today. A bit about art papers for those of you who, is there anyone in here who's not familiar with art papers? Then we could skip it. Atlanta Art Ecosystems is part of Art Paper's Fire Ecology project. Fire Ecology is a 3-year strategic plan to metaphorically embody the practice of using controlled fires to maintain ecosystem health by burning old growth in order to fertilize the soil from which new growth will rise. In 2024, Art Papers adopted this plan to mobilize our knowledge, resources, and historic role within our multiple intersecting communities to bring this legacy organization to a controlled and meaningful conclusion of operations in 2026. I want to draw your attention to the program zine, which is free and available at the front table, the welcome table. We have them there just to take, or you can ask one of our table helpers. This zine was designed to accompany the program with bios and panel schedules and information schedules, which are now provisional. I do want to let y'all know that we unfortunately omitted one bio from the zine, and we have inserts that are corrections for Amanda P. Norris, who was on the Adaptive Forums panel yesterday. Her bio and the bios for the bakery and the supermarket, the organization she was representing, were sadly left out of the zine, and they can be corrected with a little insert. Thank you also for rolling with us and our many imperfections. And so today we're going to start this panel. It's going to be a little compressed. We're going to start it here at the top of the hour. And then we're going to have a shorter break between this panel and the next panel, which will start on time at 2:30. And then the rest of the day will proceed as it was scheduled to. So thanks for all your many patiences and now, Miranda. So we're foregoing the formal bio readings because bios are available in the zine. But I am happy to say Miranda Kyle is our moderator for Thinking Publicness. And I'll hand it over to you.
Hey y'all, thanks everybody for being here and weathering everybody who enjoys running without a predator chasing them, blocking traffic. I am really honored to be here this morning to talk about what is publicness in a condensed version, and to be able to provide space as well for us to have a conversation. I do want to note that there are so many people working in public art in the city of Atlanta, in our metro region, from DIY organizers to artists to NGOs and municipal organizers all the way up to the city of Atlanta. There's a lot of folks out there doing this work. And originally, this panel was going to be huge because there was a lot of people whose voices we wanted to hear. But because of all those people doing all this amazing work, scheduling is a nightmare, like trying to get everybody on a doodle poll. So we got these incredible folks who I'm very happy to be in conversation with, and we do wish many more could be here to be in this conversation with us, which is why we'll open it up for questions later in case folks have like, what about this person? What do you think about this person's work? We'll be happy to field those questions too. But today, in thinking through like the ecology of what is public art, public space, how we access it, who has the right to it, who cultivates these spaces, who stewards these spaces, I kept coming back to the how of how this work happens. Not just how the people who get into the role of administrator, curator, cultivator, get into those positions, or how the artists become public artists, activists, stewards of the spaces that they engage with, but what is the role of folks like these, and myself and others doing this work, in cultivating those practices, and what those responsibilities look like. So, that very long monologue, could you each take a few minutes and talk about what that participation arc kind of looks like for both you personally as cultivators of conventional and non-conventional activation spaces? And we're thinking of this in like a 2-minute block. So a power summary of how we kind of got to today in your practice in working with conventional and unconventional spaces. Okay, maybe 3 minutes. Both personally and in the audiences and artists that you cultivate, if that makes sense. Digest that however you want. Chantelle, you want to go first since you're our solo artist on the panel? How did we get to Crew of the Grateful Gluttons having an 80,000 person event and starting with where it came?
Yeah, we do not have time for all of that.
No.
But so in terms of participation, thank you for inviting me to participate as a parade artist, because parade arts aren't usually thought of as in the canon of art. Like when you think of the city's arts, public artscape or culture, rarely is parade considered, an art form. So thank you for that. So participation, we have, this will be the 15th year of the Atlanta BeltLine Lantern Parade, and BeltLine Lantern Parade is definitely the mothership. But currently we have 7 annual parades this year, and it's the same format. So while I was inspired by New Orleans and leaving that parade culture, just my heart ached for it. It's a nicer way to live, basically, having parade culture in your life. But in the absence of established, hundreds of years of established parade culture, they have a way they do it, I developed doing it a different way. And so we have a wide open style of parading that New Orleans thinks is crazy, because everyone is always invited to make a lantern, a costume, or a puppet, and just show up and march with us and the bands for free. So you never know who's coming or what they're gonna show up with, and it's exciting, early Mardi Gras morning. Happy Mardi Gras, by the way. But Mardi Gras Day is when individuals are rocking it. You do not have to join a club. You don't have to belong to any association, which in New Orleans you do. There's a lot of, how to get in to the group. So our format is that everyone's always invited. So that seems to be going pretty well, because around 45,000 people participated and attended our parades in 2024. So in the span of our practice, the 15 years, over 500,000 people have come out to play with us. So that's mind-boggling to me. But I can't help but feel that it meets a need. And that's what I want. That's what we want. We want a burst of collective joy. I really truly believe is needed. I need it. Bringing people together these days is a feat. Thousands of people coming joyfully together is a wonder. I tear up every time, and I've done it 100 times. So it's powerful for me personally, and I love seeing people come. We'll see 3 generations often. The kids, the mom, the grandparents that have been doing the parades for the whole time. That makes me really happy that I feel like we're getting people participating from all over the place. That was probably my time limit.
No, I think that was really great, because as Anne and Alex, as you guys are thinking about your answer too, how do I play is always such a big part of what we hear as administrators or curators of public art, right? And Chantelle, you have this great model of you can just show up. So maybe y'all talk a little bit about your models of like participation, of how people come to play with the work you're doing.
Yes, so I'm Ann Archer Dennington with Flux Projects, and I think, I've just always kind of done the next job that makes the most sense. And when I took this job, it was the first time that it was like, oh, this is everything I've done in the past all rolled up and my perfect job. So thank you, Lewis Corrigan. I think, when we set up to do Flux Projects, it was not, we have to do a public art organization. And ultimately, Creative Time became one of our biggest models, Creative Time in the Public Art Fund. But it was really about, here's Atlanta. Lewis had this deep commitment to artists in Atlanta and this belief that they were as good as artists anywhere else, but they were not being seen, and that the same 200 people show up to every art event. And if we're going to change this, we need to put art in places where more people can see it. We need to inspire a next generation, acknowledging that all too often the art world was sort of talking to itself, but everyone is just as busy in their lives as we are in ours. So how do we make it where if you're a professional with a passion in this field, you're able to experience art when it's easy? So where are you just during the course of your daily life? And where might you have your children with you so that there's a next generation growing up that thinks that art being part of daily life is a given? And if while we're doing that, we're able to seed a generation and a city where the arts are mandated, and where to get elected to public office, you have to have an arts platform. But, oh, by the way, how do we keep our artists employed until all that happens? So it was in combination this way, a lot of it was just how do we fund artists? And how do we fund them to do projects that are not reliant on a commercial viability for that to happen? So we started with this one-night event, but it was also a one-night event and projects throughout the year. And then it was just in response to what was here, right? So it's always been very dependent upon our community in the city of Atlanta to tell us and respond, what do they like, what's important? And then it's evolved during the years, right? So our projects sometimes impact a broad audience. Other times we work really deeply in one community, and sometimes it's a combination. So again, hers project coming up at the goat farm, we spent a year connecting with Atlanta's Asian communities with satellite installations and workshops and conversations, working with the community liaison here. But it'll culminate in a project at the goat farm that's for a broader community, intentionally about taking those narratives and making them more broadly remembered. So it's always kind of been in response to what's been around. And I'll just stop there. Yeah.
I think my response dovetails quite nicely into that. For me, participation is sort of layered and inclusive. My background is I spent 6.5 years managing the public art program for Fulton County, and now I'm at Atlanta Downtown running the art and activation team. When I was at the county, I created the Public Art Futures Lab, which explores the intersection of art and technology. And for us, participation meant providing a space for artists to explore this in a very open-ended way, whether it was through paid residencies, educational programs, or just hosting an exhibit, because we believed that if you didn't even understand the technology, you had no way to participate in it and shape the future of what that looked like in the arts. We went to libraries, we went to pediatric hospitals, we went to senior centers. They absolutely love VR, which I was surprised. We took 3D printing technology into different spaces and really showcased what was possible. And by layered participation, I mean, we've had people who, in my current role, who just want to look at the art. They just want to see it as they go through the park or as they walk to their office. Some people want to interact with it. We have some giant inflatable aliens in Woodruff Park at the moment, and people want to hug the alien, and which I didn't expect, but it's great to see people just create their own way of interacting with the art. And then in the case of the work I was doing at the lab, people can actually become the artists themselves. They can put on the VR headset. They can then suddenly create these elaborate works of art that perhaps they don't have the tools at home to do that. And so then they become the artists themselves. And so I think that's, for me, it's really about that layered approach, providing different entry points for folks to participate with in a way that they want to.
We have to share a microphone.
Oh, here, we can share. You can have your own.
I don't mind sharing. I'm the oldest of three. We learned it early. So we've talked a little bit about the role of the audience, or like last minute participation by an activated public in a variety of spaces. And I think all of us have gotten those DMs on Instagram or text messages from artists or other like curators or aspiring curators who are like, well, I want to do a mural, or I want to be a band in the Lantern Parade, or how do I jump off the side of a building? And like, you know, and it's almost as if some of our artists and creative communities don't get the information on how to participate as an artist or as a potential curator in these spaces until the event's already happening. So what do you think is the responsibility of people who are holding these administrative and curatorial or leadership roles to make sure that the information is getting to artists and potential future curators of these public spaces? And what is their responsibility to be informed? Go for it. If you want to go first again?
So how do they find out about it and get involved? So the keeping the language straight with all the project partners that everyone is always invited to make a lantern or whatever. Or I mean, we did masks or dress up like a gnome is in the front of the language. You know, like that's the first thing that people hear is the BeltLine Lantern Parade. Everyone is invited to make a lantern. And in fact, you need one to be in the parade. So that they hear that and that how they access that. So I have painstakingly made a web page that is a collection of ideas because we want individual creative expression, not like make this, right? So we do a workshop series. Coming to a workshop, I really just want to turn them on to different ideas of ways to make it, not like this is the thing we are making. So we see people like run with that, which is exciting. I get the, how do I join the crew, Chantelle? I want to make giant puppets, right? So like, you know, what are those made out of? Time is what they're made out of. They're made out of a lot of time. So we've had the good fortune to have a gifted giant studio, which I wish like every artist could have the opportunity to have a gifted giant studio. You know,
if you're a developer or your daddy's a developer in the audience.
Hear that, because it's only because of gifted giant studio that I can have master classes where like I can offer 8 artists are going to spend an absurd amount of time learning how to do that. So we've gotten to have it 3 times. And like those people are now our people. Like every single one of them have stayed with our group and they've learned these skills and they're building by themselves and they can't wait. Like, and they're bugging me about like, what's next? And I was like, you're on, like, yay. So like, that's been a way that we've been able, the only way we've been able to build a community of really interested people, that really want to like do the hard, long thing. So I think that's.
So I'm trying to remember the question. So the two things I would say about it. In terms of audience, I don't think we ever get the word out early enough or broad enough or as often as we should. And that literally comes down to money. You have to produce the project. You don't have to spend X amount of more dollars towards marketing it. And that is just the unfortunate reality of working here. And for us, we always prioritize the vision of the artist. So when it comes down to a couple extra $1,000 and you want this thing or a film or we think you should have a critical essay about your work. We're going to do that other than buy an ad. And so I don't know, like, some advice I was given really early on was by Julia Emmons, and she had created the Peachtree Road Race. And she didn't create it, but she was running it then. And someone advised I go talk to her. And it was just, do the best product you can do. And so that's what we do. Our biggest investment is in the art and the artist vision. And so we've been really fortunate to the people that come. I think we work in a very supportive community. Word of mouth is how consistently half the people find their way to our projects or just show up. In terms of artists participating, I think that the artist community is pretty tied in here. I mean, we've never done a call, I've never sat on another call that didn't have over 100 submissions, no matter what the short timeline there is. One of the things we realized along the way was it was actually mid-career artists that were falling through the gaps here. So Atlanta always likes the next thing, the next hot thing, and it is. I mean, just fill in the blank. Restaurant, neighborhood,
Mural
blah,
festival.
blah, blah. Huh?
Mural festival.
Mural festival. And so an artist one time said to me, she said, I've had a gallery show, a show at the Contemporary, and a show at Mocha GA. I can't do anything again in this city for 3 years. And it was like, wow, that's sad. And so we will work with an artist multiple times in a really short period of time, if that's mandated. But what we found is young artists got a lot more opportunities than mid-career artists. You sort of aged out here. Either no one was interested, or you got to a point where you had developed artistically enough so that there was not a budget here to make you enable you to go further, or you just left. And so since 2017, we have made we've really tried to always every year do a work with a mid-career artist, looking at people at moments in their career where a substantial investment can enable them to make a sizable leap. And so Charmaine Minifield was one of those, and we did the Praise House project for her, and y'all can see what's happened with that since. Genher is one that we're working with right now. And so I think so often we're like, oh, how do we get young artists engaged? And I think that we have, so many of us, I mean, Flux Project included, we've been excellent at getting artists from student age to people like Nick Cave here to work, and often simultaneously in the same project, creating collaborations and relationships that will extend far beyond that single project. But for us, what we realized is something we could bring to the table was, how do we create something special for mid-career artists? And I think it came up yesterday. We've always said, where's the gap? Now, that may not be the gap forever, but that was the gap then.
Thanks. How about you, Alex? How do artists access your project or future curators?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a challenge at the county in terms of that audience. It was always, you would put on this, you go to great lengths to create the art or create the experience, and then trying to get people to come was always such a challenge. And then cutting through the noise of social media or whatever. I don't have the solution for that other than just being consistent. And I think like Anne said, like if you focus on delivering a good project consistently, then people will open up your emails. People will see your content on Instagram or wherever you're sharing it, and they will come because they know that they're guaranteed a good experience. When it comes to artists participating with us, again, I think it's about providing consistency. Unfortunately, like with the county's contract for services, a lot of the time the window for funding doesn't necessarily align with the agile nature of being an artist. And so I think there's opportunities for government, as well as in my new role, to provide those smaller opportunities where an artist might come to us and say, hey, I've got this awesome idea. I need $5,000 to do it. And then I'm like, well, yeah, that's great. Like, I've got this money set aside to do these little projects and be nimble, rather than just have these big buckets that require like extensive funding rounds. So I think the ways that artists can get involved is really by providing those multiple entry points. But really, I think the responsibility is on the artist to be out there looking for those opportunities, open the emails that we send, follow us on Instagram and subscribe to the posts. Like, if there's only so much we can do beyond just like sending you a direct like letter, like it can be a challenge. And then I've noticed with some examples, artists aren't reading the brief that we put in there. And so I've read plenty of great submissions, but then I'm like, you missed the brief. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I would love to give you this residency, but you didn't read the residency brief, and you're just talking about your own work. And like,
We have to include Adderall with the brief.
So I think there is a responsibility on both sides. I think there's a role for us to play in terms of providing more opportunities and smaller opportunities for a range of people. But then at the end of the day, the artists need to be looking and be hungry for the work, and seek out those opportunities.
But you mentioned something that I think we should take a moment to say, which is a lot of times the nature of funding here is we're going to give you this money and you have 1 year to complete this project. And that is just not how things work, right? So, I mean, it works here, but there are a lot, I mean, in Atlanta, we have a lot of mediocre projects that could have been magnificent if there had been a year of research and development, right? And so it's something that we tried to do along the way, like a little bit, people would apply and we'd be like, yeah, that's not really it yet, but we'll give you, I mean, it was small, like, here's $1,000, go see what you can do and come back next year. It's a miss here. Like artists should be able to apply to something, right? And just say, I want R&D money for this, and the $5,000, you shouldn't have to turn a project. You shouldn't have to turn a public art project that's going to amass a crowd of 1,000 people, right? Like, that just, the money, like no other industry would be expected to return audience member per, like, it's just, that's a real need.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. And I think administrators don't say it enough, right? Like, yes. Because it is a frustration in the operation in a fiscal year, right? And so when I was at the BeltLine, before I left, I have $1.5 million to steward across everything. So it was operations, personnel, subcontractors, artists, festivals, production, all of it. And it had to be turned over in 11 months every single year, or else I would lose money. And for artists who had brilliant ideas, we were all in tears because we were like, this is such a good idea. It needs 1 more year. It needs 2 more years. You need to be able to bake in this. And I think right now, one of the things Atlanta is struggling with that I don't know any of us have an answer for, but that we do need to keep asking the questions around is like, why do we have to operate inside 1 fiscal year? Why can't we honor the process of creativity? And yeah, put some bumpers on it, or else, it'll be the Winchester House and we'll never have, a project on the end. But why can't we build in process time? Because creativity does not happen overnight. And by demanding immediacy, we are undermining excellence that could happen. And that's something all of us have to keep, yelling about. And I think often as administrators and curators beholden to the regulations of state, federal, or county funding, that middle level kind of has to become that buffer to advocate for the artists, but also try to figure out a way to work with inside that 11-month turnover time, maybe 13 if you're really good at writing sappy apology letters to your funder, and to that end, we're almost to the dreaded funding portion of this conversation.
Okay, but one more thing, because you mentioned artist and reading the brief.
Right.
I don't know if they're artists in here, but the biggest mistake I see when I read proposals, And sometimes if it's us, we can go back and say, hey, what is this? We've had to do that before. But if I'm during something else and that is not my, like I'm just reading it, so often an artist will write this amazing thing. Here's conceptually what I want to do, and here's what my work means, and here's everything I'm passionate about. And they don't tell you what the project is. And so I just advise, like, consider that your jurors are like working with no sleep and no coffee, and you need to say right up front, I'm going to produce a project that is X, and here's all the wonderful things it's going to do, because literally sometimes I can't find the project. I agree with everything you've said, but what are we getting?
And that goes back to the responsibility of the artist. And I did want to hold some space for the frustration. As administrators and cultivators and curators, we need artists to meet us halfway. You know, like getting a DM the day before a mural project or a sculpture unveiling, saying like, how come I didn't know about this? I want to do a mural too. I want to do a sculpture too. I want to do a performance or a parade. Great, I honor that energy, but like you also have to open the emails, you have to read the brief, you have to do, and yes, those extra steps suck. I get it. Like, but you got to do that part. You got to meet us halfway. And I think that we don't have those conversations enough about what we want to support the artists, but what we need from them to meet us there. And to that end, to segue into my next question, the next generation of curators and administrators that are coming up in this city or who want to do what each of you do, how are you and your organization or you personally cultivating that next generation or thinking about them? And what should up and coming curators, cultivators be thinking about with their own practice and their career goals? Go ahead, Alex.
I think what we're doing at the Futures Lab was really helping to do that by providing artists with the tools. And a lot of the time, the residency briefs are pretty open-ended, and there have been times where things have had to change, or the final product just was more of a, like, I had a good time and I learned some stuff, and here's a static piece of art. And I'm like, that's cool. Like, I'm glad that it was a valuable experience for you, because it's partly about us getting something that we can share with the public, but it's also about investing in your skill set. So I think with the lab, we've been able to provide free educational opportunities, access to thousands of dollars worth of equipment. Mike, you still have our VR headset? Is Mike still here?
Thank you.
So I think it's things like that, is just providing the tools and not asking much in return. I mean, I was fortunate because there wasn't a lot of government oversight over what I was doing, because we weren't in a government space. And that allowed me to be a little bit flexible and like let someone take our 360 camera and drone to Italy because they wanted to like experiment while they were on traveling. That would not have been acceptable if I'd like followed the bureaucratic guidelines. But yeah, I think it's really just about providing opportunities and tools without necessarily expecting a product at the end of it.
Well, I think that, so my practice is really different. I'm doing it different. I'm running my show as an independent artist with a lot of friends and little contractors. So the future of the parades, like the collection of parades, I really like to see them as traditions. When they get to be in place as a tradition, it's doing the right thing that I want to do, you know? Like the way that people own it, and that the parades connect people to people and people to place. That's what I want them to be doing. So I want them to last forever, or as long as people want them. Like the succession planning of that, I haven't figured that out yet. Obviously in the master classes, there are people that can do what I do, which is create giant illuminated puppets and the whole idea, like design for the parade. I think that like if Hilton Head Island stopped hiring us, they would still have a lantern parade. They just wouldn't have 25 giant puppets with it. Or, so I sort of worry, like, is that okay? But figuring out how to have them go on forever and ever and ever is something that I'll get around to when I'm not in the thick of doing it. So in that funding conversation, I gotta say, I am such a grateful glutton to not apply for grants. Grants are terrible, terrible, time suck, awful things that are just like the last thing I want to do. So my projects, I have project partners that are cities. Little cities are just darling to work with. It's Town of Hilton Head Island, City of Haverhill, City of Sandy Springs. It's so much nicer to have a client than apply for a grant and cross your fingers that maybe you'll get it. Will you get the money before your project starts? No, you're not gonna get the money before your project starts. Like the only one that I have to apply to in 2025, which just is our new BeltLine project where the weird things are. Although it was really successful, I got kicked back into the RFP process and have to go through the panel review. Even though we have outside funding, we may or may not get that. So immediately I'm thinking, I am gonna find somebody else to work with for that badass project instead of that. So sorry, grantors, to tell you that it's so long, it's so much bureaucracy, it's really hard. And like, I'm a rule follower, I'm gonna read all the things and it's silly if you turn in an application that isn't your best shot, that you didn't read it. That's just ridiculous. You're not a professional, you're not gonna get it. So, but anyway, that's my 2 cents about get clients, not grants.
Well, so from the other side, the art nonprofit administrator, grateful grant recipient. I would gratefully apply to more and more grants. And the only reason we are not applying to more grants is we just physically run out of hours in the day, if you look at all 24 of them, to write another one. So I always have a list of grants, the ones we have to apply to and the ones we are hoping to get to. And it's different. Being an organization is much different than working as an individual artist. But that was not your question. The next generation.
Who's the next Anne?
I don't know. So, it's kind of a tough one because when we started, all of our calls were open to artists and curators, and we have to date had one curator actually apply to do a project, and we were open to any curator applying with anything, but only one ever has. So it was pre-COVID, but we had this idea for a postgraduate curatorial fellowship that would come and work with us for a year. And then during that year, we would produce, you would get a stipend that would not cover your time at all, but you would get a stipend, and we would produce at the end, you would get one project of yours produced by us. And that would be like a dream. It is not anywhere in the funding landscape or something that we are going to be able to do, but we kind of hold that out. It came up in our last strategic plan. In terms of administrators, I am not a good manager of volunteers or extra people, right? So we used to hire that out. Rebecca Kunchik, who works with me, does all of our volunteers. I do not do well with a person there that I am supposed to help you. It's just, know your limitations, right? So
Do not ask me anything.
No, but if most, a lot of the people though that work with us now, including Rebecca, are people that said, I can do this for you. Do you need a volunteer? And they brought something they could do that was beyond what we were doing, and they did it really well, and we're like, oh, we didn't know we even needed that. We can give you pennies to do it. Oh, maybe we can give you a little more to do it. So I would just say, if you really want to do something, show up and do it. I started working in the gallery world because I basically came in and said, I can work for free on, I had a job where I could do evenings and weekends, and I could do that during the day. And I just did it until I was like, okay, I have to go back to school. And they were like, well, we can pay you for 50% of your time. I mean, to do it, you kind of have to be really hungry and really wanting to work. And so I would just say to like young administrators, there'd be none in here. I got to a point where someone said, how do I do what you do? And I was like, if you don't really have to do this work, like if you're like, oh, I love art, so maybe I'll go into arts administration, I would say, no, don't. Like I majored in drawing and painting. I can proficiently draw and paint. Well, I mean, I'm really out of practice. But I one day went, I have nothing burning to say. Like, I do not need to clutter that field. So I started working with artists, but not as an artist. So this is just, I went into arts administration. My dear friend Lewis left Hemingway Studies and became a hedge fund manager. I went into art, and I love working with artists, and I would not change it. I think like I would produce projects no matter, like once, you have this reckoning like, okay, this is really hard. What would I do if I didn't do this? And I realized I would just do this from scratch again. So I love art. I love being around artists. I love looking at shows. I love to travel. I love my job. I get up every day and I love my job. In my entire career, I have never thought I don't want to go to work. And I feel so privileged for all the people that have made this possible, right? However, Lewis, who does not work in the arts, sees every single art installation around the world that I wish I saw. So if you don't have to do this, go to business school. I mean, just straight out, go to business school.
I think that's great advice. I was on track to be a chemist because I wanted to be a myth buster, and I went to one iron pour, completely derailed my whole life. I was like, oh, this is like chemistry, it's adjacent. I think and now here I am, a curator and administrator. Part of my ministry is preventing that from happening to another artist, right? Is basically like, if you want to be an artist, I want you to be an artist. I don't want you to have to like switch to administration to survive, right? If you have a burning passion for it, totally, double track, do it. But if you're doing it to survive, that means there's something in our ecosystem that's broken. Like we've all talked about today, like find a client, find some way around the bureaucracy, you anarchist. Make friends with people who made better career choices. I think like all of these things are really great advice, but it definitely addresses how much our artists are having to juggle and shuffle and hustle in Atlanta to survive.
So with that, a shout out to a whole generation of artists that along the way picked up the mantle of arts administration and worked for the Fulton County Arts Council. So I'm talking about Gregor Turk, Lisa Tuttle. I mean, I'm sure we could all name others. And it's kind of like if you really think about it, there is a whole generation of artists that left or did the work so that we sit here today.
Absolutely. And I think holding space for the fact that they made those massive sacrifices so we could do this is incredible. But how do we prevent that from continuing and being a generational issue in Atlanta? And we can do it with projects and one-offs that everybody does, but even something like the residency program that I started when I was at the BeltLine in 2019 to address the fact that we weren't seeing women, queer, Black, brown, Indigenous people in public art at the same rate that we were seeing middle-aged white ladies, no offense, girls.
None taken.
That when I asked for $15,000 and then $20,000 to support those residency programs, my colleagues thought I was insane. They were like, why do they need that much money? I'm like, have you seen how much rent is in Atlanta? And that sort of thing is still a one-off. It's not common. We see developers who do amazing things like give artists like Chantelle space, but not enough, right? How many times are you driving around the city of Atlanta and we see absolutely empty, zoned for mixed use buildings that are empty on the bottom floor when those developers could be activating their space, as long as they don't do it toxically for clout and kick all the artists out 3 years later.
Just so you know, our deal is dicey. Like, it's the 30-day notice to vacate.
Right.
And at first, I was really nervous about that.
Yeah.
2 years later, it's totally changed my practice.
Yeah.
So.
Little investments, but this is a huge problem that we all have to solve together. And it's a money problem. It's a mid-career problem. It's a space problem. It's a process problem. We don't have all the answers. We're just up here with microphones talking about it. And I did want to, kind of like very gently segue as a last question before we open it up for Q&A into reality of the times we live in. To end on a high note. And thinking about funding and supporting artists doing work that is now dangerous and work that is now risky and not pre-censoring ourselves. And what does that look like for each of you? And then we'll open it up for Q&A.
So for us, it looks exactly like it looked last year. I mean, we aren't changing anything. Though I will say I'm attending a DeVos Institute panel on Monday at 3 or 3:30, and it is about it's basically in response to the NEA and what's going on. So if they go, okay, you really need to say not diverse Atlanta audiences, but broad Atlanta audiences, I would probably make that concession if they're like, but we're not doing anything differently. We serve the city of Atlanta. The city of Atlanta looks just the same this year as it did last year.
I love that. Don't do the work of fascism for them.
But you should all still apply.
Yes.
But I would say one other thing. It is really hard to do this work in Atlanta. I mean, it is fun because, in some ways it's easy. We don't have a lot of regulations. People are super happy that you're doing it. The other day I got an email from a City of Atlanta employee at 12:40 a.m. about a permit we were applying for. Those people work really hard to try to make art happen here. But I kind of feel like it's always so hard here, so that, is this really going to be that much harder? I don't really think so.
For us...
I'm an optimist, though, so...
Yeah, I'm a little Pollyanna myself. Our scene looks the same this year. Our contracts are done or in process for all the parades, which is good. One of the reasons that I do this work, is to the collective. I think we need it. I think we need collective joy. I think that we can get through the next chapter of the shit show as long as we know that. The last Saturday in March is going to be the Butterfly Lantern Parade, and I'm going to get my groove on and dance in the street with strangers and be reminded that people are wonderful and full of lovely surprises and that humors are full of love, and just be reminded, take a hate break, right? That there's something in us. I think we have a common calling to delight one another, and it's a vital virtue of humankind. And parades hold space just for that. So I feel like you can get your tank full and, there's reasons to root for the humans. My species isn't horrible every minute of every day. I reminded that, and I like to have them on the calendar. And we were talking about how people find out that, I send out a Valentine that, put these dates on your calendar and know that there are 9 occasions this year all around the calendar that you can get your joy fix, and just that way for us little people, it's going to be okay.
Well, coming from the county where, fortunately, what's happening at the federal level was never really impacting things, at least within the arts at the county. The issue with the county is that arts is not a mandated function. So whenever there's issues with balancing the budget because the county commissioners don't want to raise the millage rate, but they want us to do more, they always look at, well, what can we cut? And because arts isn't a core function, we're not mandated to do it, then that's why every year you see, oh, Fulton County cuts the arts budget because they don't have to do it. And so there's this constant debate within the different factions of county government around, like, what does that look like, and what do those cuts look like? I think when I created the Futures Lab, I wanted it to be sustainable, so I sort of diversified my funding pool. So I had Atlanta Downtown, I had MARTA Artbound, I had Underground, I had the county, and then I also had Microsoft, who were just moving in, and they were looking to provide support. So I kind of capitalize on these small little opportunities to actually make it happen. And I think those opportunities still exist for thinking a bit creatively around how arts can be integrated into the way that we do things. Another thing that we're looking at in my current role is how can artists participate in facade improvements downtown? So rather than have, say, an architect or a contractor do the work, how can an artist come and improve this facade with an artistic lens and get that money that a painter or a contractor would have gotten? And so I think it's, for us in arts administration, it's about trying to think a bit creatively about how we can put artists into these roles that traditionally they haven't been part of.
That's great. Thank you all so much. And we have about 10 minutes left, so we can open it up for Q&A if anybody has questions. Yes.
Very interesting, thank you. I don't want to be a pessimist, but I think we're in an existential crisis in this country. Chantelle, your work is just about joy, which is fantastic. But I think we need to be aware it's going to start trickling down, and we have to be on our guard, and because there's going to be erosion of rights in this country. I'm really convinced of it. And I think you all need to keep up the great work, but you shouldn't be naive about what's coming down the pike. So, yeah.
I don't think it's naivete. I mean, but I also think you can just become paralyzed by it. And you can become paralyzed by it, right? And I've sat on some calls with arts administrators that were just like going in that direction. And so I think it's like with everything. So yes, I mean, I can definitely fall off the cliff with you. But at some point you look at it and I come back to do the work. I mean, so when it all gets really, really bad, I come back to do the work. And so that, yeah.
Well, and I agree you need to carry on and move forward and do the best that you can, but I just think that we have to understand the moment of time we're in. It'll start trickling down.
I don't think there are anybody in the arts that doesn't realize the moment that we're in. I mean, because we get it from all directions.
And I think, too, a lot of that is experience, right? And because we're also all people. And I was a new hire at the Carlos Museum last year in March. And in April, when the students were protesting, I was shot at with rubber bullets on my way to work, de-arresting students and faculty and my colleagues. And I brought that up to the director, and he said, how do we make the museum a safe haven? And I think that's what's important, is like, how do we turn institutional colonized spaces into safe harbors?
No, I think that is one excellent strategy, and that collectively the arts need to be thinking about those strategies going forward.
And I think a lot of us are, but I think it's hard to say stuff in public too, because Big Brother's always listening. You know, and if we look at the history of the last 40 years in this country, we have to learn those lessons of what happened to dissenters of all flavors. And art and joy was how we got to today. And it's not naivety, it's power.
I can project it. Can you hear me? Yeah. A related question. What are the best examples of public art projects that have happened in Atlanta that have effectively and publicly critiqued the fascist elements of the Atlanta government? And if there aren't great examples, what is it possible? And then what advice would you give to make that happen?
Public art is a hard space for that, right? Because public art is a fixed moment. If it is a parade, if it is a pop-up, if it is a happening, that can have a little more influence, right? But an object that has to go through a massive bureaucratic process might not be that catalytic point, you know? But public space is stolen land. Be ungovernable. Figure it out, you know?
I mean, and I think that a lot of times what public art can do is I don't, from what I see, like sometimes a direct attack, if your real goal is to change minds and change the way people see, you know, I think it's like with your work or your practice, what's your goal? Is it to protest or, you know, where it is? So for our work, it's often about bringing people together in a shared space and helping them find common ground and shared space. So, you know, so Charmaine's work that in Oakland Cemetery commented on the disinterment of slaves so that white people could buy the plots and the way they were moved, and there are over 800 unmarked graves in African American burial grounds. I mean, that was, it spoke to Atlanta's past. It spoke to the way people have been treated. Oakland Cemetery embraced that. They were very interested in the project because it dovetailed work that they were doing. And the people that showed up for that and were moved to tears and thanked us for doing it were not only the African Americans, it was the white people that came and said, thank you for doing this. So I think, like, you know, just think about how you want your work to operate in that. I mean, I think a lot of people are thinking about, you know, what kind of work we do now, but I don't know that for me right now, having a really public debate with Flux Project's artwork that goes the way of family dinner conversations or what we see on the press and all that, I don't know I don't feel like we need another voice doing that in the space, right? So how do we do it in a way that people really begin to open their minds? And I don't have that answer right now.
And just as a time check, we got 4 minutes left.
Oh,
Speed run.
we talk, like my group talks about that we want to do political satire that's silly and fun somehow in parade, and we haven't been able to figure it out because we're all a little scared to put our faces in the front of the thing, like the bands, you know, like they have other gigs, I have other, like how do we find that thing? But we talk about it a lot. We all went to see some of the Mardi Gras parades, and it was just so good to see them doing it. Like the Blue Island Blues was a really good one. Like so we don't know, but it's in the front of our minds.
Yeah, I think the beauty of public art is that we can provide space for people to contemplate and think themselves. And so rather than being very upfront and putting out this confrontational message, sometimes it's easier, at least in government, for us to create a space for people to come to that conclusion by themselves without being so overt. I definitely found that in the county where, again, we exist at the whim of our Board of Commissioners, and we have politically diverse views from north through to south, and so upsetting one group of people ends up with an email in my inbox saying that I need to justify why I did this, or why we have are doing like being political when we are meant to be representing everyone. And I think those have been successful ways we can kind of provide space for people to really contemplate and think and challenge some views without being so overt and putting everything out there.
I think we have time for like one more question.
I'm Judy, I'm a multidisciplinary artist in Atlanta, and earlier Miranda, you were speaking about how do you find artists, you know what I mean, like how can artists know about what projects you guys are having? And I come from a very low socioeconomic class, and when getting here to this room just to ask this question, it wasn't that I didn't have the resources to get here. I just didn't know I had resources. I had no idea where to look. So do you guys have, this is a twofer, I just want to use my 4 minutes, but, or whatever time that I have. Do you yourselves, or do you have teams or people, part of your groups that go into lower socioeconomic spaces, you know what I mean, that haven't reached the spot, and like look for the artists, look for the brilliance, look for the minds, because there are so many of these pop-ups, you know what I mean, we just don't get the audience, we don't get the eyes, we don't get the viewing. And do you go there and do you have like those aspects, do you do that? And then also I wanted to ask, because Chantelle, you were talking about joy and all of that, and this also goes a lot, part of someone here asked or stated about, you know, public projects reflecting a lot of what is happening politically in this country and all of these different things that we're saying and not saying. And I think that when you say the joy, right? So I wanted to ask you guys, like, are there any other consensus of themes that you are seeing the public asking for, the public reacting to, wanting? I have my 6 degrees of separation, but outside of that, what are you seeing from our city that people are needing? That are, you know what I mean? Like, that's my question. Okay, thanks.
I'm going to try to speed run this. So when I was at the BeltLine, I was there for 1,000 years. Part of my soul is like under the concrete. We had a brilliant community engagement team, and we served 45 neighborhoods. And most recently, I'm going to give her a shout out, Rashida Williamson, who was like, I don't know, the best lobbyist for community inclusivity. And she would go to every neighborhood. She would door knock. She is flyering. And she had such a heart for making sure people knew what is going on. And she's still there. So if you run into Rashida, give her a high five and a hug and maybe a cup of coffee. And that, I think, is what it takes, right, to get people, because some people don't know. They're not connected in the same way we're connected, and asking people to go on a website or go online is silly. So I think it takes human-to-human encounters, which segues into my other answer. Coming out of COVID, people are starved for community, but nobody knows what to do. So I saw like a really lovely thing on Instagram yesterday, and it was said, host a picnic, host a barbecue at a park. So I think we have to start community over again in a post-COVID world, and that's really just an invitation, and we have to get over ourselves and our ego and just be like, hi friend, old friend, new friend, Instagram friend, why don't you meet me in the park for an hour, and we're gonna have snacks, and it's great and easily accessible. And I think that's kind of where we're at, and that's what people are starved for, is restarting community in our post-COVID landscape. I know we're 1 minute over. Does anybody want to add anything?
Getting the word out into communities, like in the early days of Lantern Parade, I personally would go with a poster and not leave it unless I had a conversation explaining what it was so you could repeat it. So, but we get a lot, like physical things in neighborhoods that you don't know how to find it in a digital space. So like I think our yard signs and the little cards that we do are important that way. What was the second part of your question? How we reach out to what people. I told you, but I mean, like they want a hate break. They want to be together and see that the people you share a city with as playful volumes of light, and to be witnessed as that. You know, it does a body good. Even if just for an hour, I feel like it's life affirming.
And I'm going to speak for you guys, hang out for maybe 15 minutes at least, if you guys want to talk to everybody else. And all the bios and how to get a hold of folks is in the document. Thank you all so much.